Legislation meeting is called to order. Mr. Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Alderman Kennedy. Alderman Boyd.
Present.
Alderwoman Howard.
Aye. Present. Here.
Alderwoman Hubbard. Alderwoman Murphy.
Here.
Alderman Ogilvy.
Here.
Alderwoman Navarro.
Here.
Alderwoman Middlebrook. Alderman Vaccaro.
Present.
President Reed. You have 6 present, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, so we're going to put Board Bill 73 just on hold for a bit while they line up, the sponsor lines up some people. Testimony. Thank you. It's a good word. So Alderwoman Navarro, do you want to come up and speak on resolution number 12 as amended?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have a brief update on where we are. So Resolution 12 is the resolution that establishes an advisory committee looking at how we would implement a reduction from 28 to 14 wards. So just as a reminder, this isn't about the redistricting and that sort of thing, but just essentially how do we implement the logistics of going from 28 to 14. And so I've been having conversations since this passed about how we would set up that advisory committee, because I think it's really important to the credibility of whatever recommendations come out of that committee that, that the public and that all of us, anybody taking those recommendations, have trust and confidence in the group of people who came together. So I've had some meetings with people who appeared at the public hearing and shared some of their questions and concerns, as well as Nicole Hudson in the mayor's office. And I have some preliminary thoughts that I'm going to be sharing with aldermen. So I've been reaching out to all of the aldermen to set up one-on-one meetings to just get their thoughts on how we want to put this together. Some of the ideas have would have the aldermen appointing members to the committee. We could also have an at-large process where members of the public could apply to be on the committee. And so I'm going to be sharing those, just those possibilities with some of the aldermen and get their feedback, and then we'll work on putting that committee together. So that's all I have right now. Is we're in the process of putting the advisory committee together. That committee will then have public meetings, public hearings, and invite a wide variety of people to come and share input before they would make their recommendations.
I would, I have things that I would like to make sure get answered during all this, but, so I want to go ahead and put a subcommittee together. I'm going to let you be the chairman of the subcommittee, and Scott, I would ask that you be on that committee. Beyond that, I would ask that you don't really need to keep polling everybody. I would think that public meetings would be nice. I've been getting calls because people have called me, and the calls that I'm getting are, if, and of course the one that probably went through my mind is people one of the things keep coming up, they keep saying, well, the county council's only got blah amount of people, So 6, and I believe they only get about $10,000 a year. So if the board goes down to 14, are we going to go down to $10,000? Because people want to know, are we going to be saving money by doing this? There's questions that I'm asked. Or are we going to go to full-time aldermen where they can't hold any other job except aldermen? Because people are also asking, gee, well, are they going to be full-time? Or is it still going to be where they make more money but have other jobs and don't come in that often? So one of the things that that certainly I'm going to try to recommend is if we go down to 14 aldermen, that we reduce the salaries down to $10,000, or it becomes a full-time position where you have to do the job full-time and it wouldn't be any other one. I think both of those need to be explored, because if the idea is we go to 14, but it's like it is now, you can have a full-time job, you don't have to make all the meetings, and those are the complaints that I'm getting from people. So, I would just make sure that, I would like to make sure those things, and I would like that I would appreciate if you guys would meet over summer break, that by, I'd say September, October, and I believe there is some time limit when you're doing a subcommittee, but that subcommittee would report back to the full committee whenever we get back in session, and it could be late September. And since Scott's the vice chairman of this one, a lot of that, I'm probably going to just turn over to Scott to run the meetings. So, but kind of on your timetable, Scott. But we want to make sure. But those are questions that I've been asked that I would like to have answered. So, are we prepared to reduce the alderman's salary down to 10,000 or whatever the county council? Because we keep saying, well, and then they could have full-time jobs and they would just have council meetings where the public are invited, similar to what they do. Or we have full-time aldermen that's the only position they do and that they can't hold any other jobs.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to see if anybody has any questions, and we'll go down the list here. Alderman Kennedy, would you want me to wait and come back to you, or you want to go? Or do you have questions on?
I'm against everything.
Okay. So, just real briefly, I'll bring you very fast up to speed. We're doing a subcommittee, similar to what you did when we were in public safety.
Okay.
It's her bill, she'll be the chairman, Scott's going to be with her, she'll put it together. The questions that I've been asked by people who have called me that I'd like them to look into is, one, that if we go to 14 aldermen, because they keep saying, well, the county only has, are we going to reduce the alderman's salary down to the 10,000 a year, or whatever it is that they make? Or does the alderman position become a full-time position where you can't hold any other job, and then you are a full-time alderman? I think the expectation from people are, this is a money-saving thing, which it's not going to be. It's actually going to cost way more money unless we operate like the county and we do reduce the alderman's salary down to that 10,000, because, and again, that's the comparison we always get.
Right.
So those are a couple things that I wanted the subcommittee to look into and have answers when they come back,
Okay.
which they need to by somewhere in September, early October. And
Mr.
now-
Chairman, could I just respond to that?
Sure.
Real quick. So one, I just want to make clear that this committee is only making recommendations, so they're not going to make any decisions about salaries. I think one of the things that they will be exploring is the role of the alderman, and out of that will come, is this going to be a full-time position, based on, what's going to be required. So I just want to make clear that everybody knows that this committee is not going to be determining salaries, it's going to be
Well, no,
making recommendations.
It's not a matter of determining salaries, but it does say if you're going to be a part-time alderman, or is it going to be full-time alderman? And then we can actually determine the salaries here, because based off of your findings is where I'm going to put a board bill together saying we need to reduce in, whatever it is, 6 years from now, whatever it is, that if we're going to go to 14 aldermen, that salary either has to be reduced if we're going to be true to the public, or the aldermen have to be full-time aldermen, and that's their job. In other words, they can't hold another job, because one of the things that people complain about is, gee, I called my alderman, I can't get a hold of them, or whatever, so we got to define what even our jobs are.
Right, so just to make it clear, there would be a follow-up board bill that would implement any of the recommendations that
Right.
come out of this. The other thing is the resolution says, calls for an interim report 6 months after the group convenes. So are you requesting that we move that up then, or are you suggesting that there be another update like I'm doing right now in September or
Well,
October?
I'd like to have some sort of a real update of the findings by then. Even though it says 6 months, there's also, the push to put this back on a ballot. And I really think that people need to understand what they voted on the last time, and if it does go back to a ballot, what are they voting on? So I would think that with everything that we have going on, that if we're going to try and explain to people, because the expectation of everybody that I talked to that voted on this goes, well, gee, I didn't realize that, I thought we were going to save money. I thought, so I'd like, because, like I said, there's an effort to get this back to a ballot, which I actually support, but I do think that people need to understand what they're voting for, and I don't think they were given that opportunity. So, yes, I would like to at least get a fairly decent report by September, October. And that's a fairly good time frame. I mean,
Well, we are looking into finding a facilitator who could assist with the meetings on this and making sure we're getting public input. So that's, I mean, I can definitely give a report back in September or October. I don't know how many meetings will have had by then, but I will definitely do my best.
I would hope you're starting to get input and can come back by then. I mean, if it's just a matter of announcing meetings, you know, if you need help getting places set up throughout the city, let me know and we'll find places for you to meet.
Thank you.
It's just up to you and Vice Chairman Scott to, you know, put a group together. What happens in subcommittees, a lot of times they never come back and report back. A lot of times there's no meetings, and because this is important and because there's a push to put this back on a ballot, I think that the people have a right to know what exactly this will do. And, when you start talking about dividing it, is there money? I mean, everybody was under the impression we're going to save money, and I guarantee you that's the opposite. A lot of people that have called me because it's in this committee have said, gee, why, when I say, well, I would imagine that it's going to be more of a full-time position, the aldermen are going to want more money, they're saying, well, wait a minute, and then I know the aldermen, from what I talked to, their expectation is they will make more money and they'll have a staff to do whatever they want done. So, anyway, these are things that people called me about, and I'm certainly interested in, and if you need help getting places to meet, please let me know. I'll find places.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
So let me go down the list. Alderman Kennedy, would you have any questions?
I don't have any questions, thank you.
Okay.
I noticed in the resolution it said the committee is not limited to a particular number, but do you have an idea of what you want to start off with as far as a number of members of this advisory committee? Also projected your first meeting date, and then we're back into, I guess, 6 months report from there.
So this is why so last week I sent out an email and I'm currently scheduling appointments with aldermen so that I can get some input and establish what that schedule is going to be and how many people. Like I said, we have, I have some particular ideas about, if all of the aldermen want to make sure that they appoint one person to this committee, or depending on how many at-large members, those things have not been decided. And I would prefer not to make those unilaterally. I would like to get some input on that, and I've started having some initial conversations, and I fully expect, by the end of July, early August, I will have met with everyone who would like to have input on how big that committee will be and when it will meet.
Okay.
So I'm open to, you can give me your suggestions and feedback right now, if you'd like.
God bless you. My first thought. But, Mr. Chairman, you had mentioned something about a subcommittee. So are you recommending that there's a subcommittee be established, or are we talking about, because the resolution clearly says advisory committee, which is outside the scope of a subcommittee of the legislation committee. So can you clarify what you're saying?
Yeah, because I think it would be better to explore it and go ahead and set up a subcommittee so that we're moving forward. Now, they can work in whatever capacity they want, whether they're doing advisory, however they're doing it. But we've done it in the past. We've done that in public safety, where we put together a subcommittee rather than keep coming back to the full committee. The subcommittee can actually work a lot more efficiently and a lot faster, so we're not having to hold meetings all summer, which I'm willing to do, but a subcommittee can put things together and move however they feel the best way to move this through. Since she's the sponsor of the bill, the resolution, I would like her to head up the subcommittee, work with our vice chairman, and put together however she feels best so that we can get answers, on this. I mean, it's the best way, I think, to actually move things in a quick fashion.
Okay, thank you. No further questions.
Could I Mr. Chairman, respond to that real quick? I think one way that I envision this is there'd be a subcommittee. I know there are several aldermen that have already expressed interest in helping schedule meetings and that sort of thing. So that subcommittee, I think, could be kind of a working group to make sure that we get meetings scheduled in the various places to support the advisory committee. I think that's how I would use that subcommittee.
And then we have to be careful that a majority of the members on the legislation committee is not engaged, right, at the same time?
That would be my understanding, because then it would essentially be a quorum of the legislation committee.
Okay. Because, I mean, some aldermen could really get excited and want to participate, and then next thing you know, you really have a committee working on it. So I
Yeah,
just want to be mindful of that.
Yeah, thank you. I think it'll be a relatively small group, like I said, just to help support the logistics of getting the advisory committee meeting. But thank you, that's a very good point to be aware of.
And I would agree with that. And ultimately, they're going to have to come back to the full legislative committee. So ultimately, they're going to do a lot of the legwork for us, come back, and I think a smaller group will be able to move through the system way faster. But I didn't think about, but I'm glad you brought that up. Was that it?
That's it, thank you.
Alderwoman Howard.
I was just recollecting that several years right after this was passed, I believe the alderman from the 25th had brought forward some, I don't know if it was a resolution or a board bill, but it's my understanding, I think, that it didn't go anywhere, but I think maybe we need to.
Right, in my recollection, I wasn't here, but I do remember looking at it, and I believe it was an advisory committee around redistricting specifically, and if anyone knows better, they can correct me, but I believe it was a citizens committee to look at the redrawing of the lines and making sure.
I would advise you maybe to pull that up and see
Okay, yep.
what that was.
Absolutely.
And maybe include that. Also, you know, when we look at this and back, you know, in 2012, I think that we need to look at the population and things that have transpired since that time and how we look at that with a racial equity lens. And are people really informed about what this will do about their representation at City Hall? And I don't know who you're working with to head this up. I don't know if you're using university partners or I'm not sure where you've reached, but I think that might be a good option. Is maybe University of Missouri St. Louis has been tracking us closely. Also, I guess even WashU or St. Louis University probably have some people that are very competent in this area. I think that as we move forward, I think we need to be very sensitive, and I know you include that here, of how we bring this about and what the people are going to get, what the expected consequences. And then, you know, looking at, does our charter work well with this representation? You know, because we have a whole city charter built around 28 aldermen that was changed back in the early 1900s from 14 to 28. So looking back at that history and why it was changed, and interestingly enough, when they changed it to 28, the population was just about the same as it is now. So, you know, I think we have to weigh those things and move carefully as we move forward. Be very careful that we are not disrupting a form of government that serves the people well. I know with the first time I voted for it, but then looking back and reconsidering, you know, we've got 10 years lapse here between when it was enacted and when we're planning on putting it through. And I think, I would say probably being elected 8 years ago, I don't have the same constituency I had when I was elected in 2010. So I think we have to look at that and look at our constituency and what their expectations for the representation is.
Thank you.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. And Alderman Kennedy, you may want to comment, because one of the things that the caucus is saying, they feel that when this goes to 14, that the African-American or the North Side community will not get proper representation if you have a lot of white people representing black wards, and I know that's come up. And I know the caucus is far wanting to put back on the ballot to rethink it, because they felt that when it was passed through, there was really nothing, no money spent north. Did you want to comment on any of that, or not really?
I do have a question, though, not necessarily a comment. So you're thinking there's the advisory committee, and then just some others to help out scheduling the meetings of the advisory committee, and that you were calling a subcommittee? Not per se, but these individuals who...
Yes, that's what
one.
has emerged this
Okay.
morning from this conversation, yes.
Okay.
And I have been, and I was speaking earlier to the conversations that I've been having with Nicole Hudson in the mayor's office, and I spoke with some of the people who were here at the public meeting that we had on this resolution to hear about their questions and concerns. And I'm in the process of meeting with aldermen to get feedback on how we put that advisory committee together. And we are... with Nicole Hudson, we are reaching out to some of the university partners who might be able to help facilitate this process.
And has the chair of legislation selects the chair of the
Right.
advisory committee?
And so what I did is,
Chair of the
the
subcommittee.
chair of the subcommittee
Subcommittee.
is, because it's her bill to start with, so I went ahead and said, and she's also on our committee, so she will actually chair it.
The
along-
subcommittee.
The subcommittee, along with our vice chair, Scott. I have a lot of faith in Scott, so he's a smart guy.
He smiles.
We don't always agree, but that's
I
why
know you
he's my
don't.
vice chair. We don't have to agree.
Okay,
But yeah, so that's kind of what, but I thought a smaller group could get,
right.
because there's also, when we come back,
Then who selects the chair of the advisory committee?
So that is yet to be determined. I think that's why I want to get some input, and I think if we bring in one of these partners from one of the universities who can help facilitate that process and help us determine what is going to be the best way to establish those chairs. So I apologize, I don't have more information yet. We're still very much in the preliminary stages of putting this together and trying to be very intentional about how we put it together, so that whatever recommendations the committee comes up with, there is a sense of trust and credibility in the community that we did this seeking as much input as we could. So I will have more to report on, I would say, in September, after we've had a chance to bring these people together and put that process in place. And I'm very, very open to any feedback or suggestions to make sure that we are doing this in an open, transparent way.
And the purpose of this being back on the agenda today is for you to make a report?
well, she had asked if we could hear this again. And so it's not so much to make a report, but to go ahead and get the process
Organize it.
rolling, because
Okay. All right.
a lot of these things sit forever. And I know that, for instance, and I could let my vice chairman speak to it, but we put together a board bill that said there needs to be a committee of residents to make sure that that the aldermen, as you're spending money or taking money in, there's supposed to be a committee that oversees that you're following the rules on collecting money and how that's done. We have not found the person that lives in a cave, because in that you can't have ever participated in a political campaign, don't plan to participate in one, never gave money to a candidate. I'm not even, so we've had real trouble finding people to be on that committee. We make committees that never meet. I think this is important because I do think, and again, I know the effort to get it back on the ballots out there. I support that.
Right.
I'm open about that. But I do think that people need to get a true understanding. And it seems to me that the people that have called me and like, Joe, why do you support that? After I get done talking to them, they're like, well, we didn't realize that this was, what would happen. We didn't realize that it's going to be more money, less representation. So that's why the questions really need to be answered. If we go to 14, because everybody keeps saying, well, the county only has, are we going to go to that kind of a rule thing where the county guys make very limited money, but they have full-time jobs? Right now,
Again, would require
you-
change to the charter.
Well, and we can get it on the ballot to change all that, and I think that the people would support that, you know, is the alderman gonna be a full-time position?
But again, we're running out of time. I mean,
Right,
we've
and that's
got,
why, and Alderman Kennedy, that's why I wanted to get the ball rolling on this. I'd like to kind of make sure that we're on top of making sure this moves through, that this isn't just something that sits. I actually, I don't know if I'm a sponsor on the resolution, I should be, but I actually think it's a good thing, because I think people do really need to see what's in front of them. And that's why I'm anxious to want to make sure we're moving forward on this as quickly as possible. And it will either support what I think, and, you know, or it will say that, gee, wait, maybe we are better off of 14. I don't see that as being a good thing. I'm not trying to protect my job because I'm old and I'm probably not going to do this much longer. But, and some people, oh, you know, these guys are just trying to protect their job. No, like every alderman that I know, we're all trying to make sure that our neighborhood is taken care of. We're all fighting for our neighborhoods. And, you know, is this the best way to go? I'm curious myself, so that's why I'm trying to move it along fairly quickly. Especially if, when we come back, if everybody shows up and we get this back on a ballot, I think it would help in the long run for people to be able to make an intelligent decision whether they believe this is a good thing or not a good thing, if that makes sense.
It does. I have a little bit of a concern that if, I thought that the chair of this committee was going to select the chair of the advisory committee.
I'm selecting her, only because,
Well, he's distinguished, I'm sorry.
the
excuse me, Mr.
advisory
Chairman,
committee
Advisory
itself.
committee versus subcommittee.
oh,
Right.
okay. Well, I mean, so if you feel, I mean, you have a lot more knowledge than I do. I usually defer to you and Jeffrey on a lot of stuff. Do you feel that we should separate the two and that we should put together a separate advisory committee?
Well,
And-
the resolution calls for the advisory committee.
Correct.
Directs this committee to select or to create the advisory committee.
Right, there's nothing in the resolution about a subcommittee, so that was
Right.
the chairman's request.
But I am specifically talking about the
Advisory committee, right. We don't have, and I'm looking at it now, I don't believe there's any language in here about who the chair of that advisory committee will be.
It is not.
It's not in the
It's not.
resolution.
It is not.
No.
So then, how can you create an advisory committee without selecting some leadership for that committee at some point? And to me, that comes down to the chair of this committee. This committee can say, we set up an advisory committee, but who takes the lead for getting any work done with it if some bodies are not selected to do so?
And of course, certainly I'll take all the help I can get. The reason I feel a subcommittee is because I wanted to make sure we're moving this along. And, you know, if you feel it's more appropriate for me to appoint the head of a subcommittee, and we certainly, or an advisory committee, I'm sorry.
The alderman from the 22nd has a response.
What's that?
The alderman from the
Okay,
22nd has a
yes.
response.
Anybody just jump in, because I'll take all the advice.
That's why I kind
It's
of,
been around.
that's why I kind of brought that up earlier. I was kind of confused, subcommittee versus advisory committee, and I think it would be a lot clearer if the resolution would specify who would chair, and then that would be absolutely clear.
So do you feel we need
Who
to
selected you?
amend the,
It's already,
no, it's already
It's already
been out.
passed.
it's already passed.
Floor, yeah, it's already passed. So I'll take,
I will do whatever this, I mean,
suggestion,
if this committee comes up with a process right now to determine who the chair of the advisory committee is, I will carry that out with fidelity.
so who's that?
I mean, just following the rules and protocol, so, and I yield to my colleague from the 18th Ward. So can the legislation committee just go ahead and set today who the chairperson is? Would that be within the rules?
As far as I understand them, it can be, yes.
Okay, so, I mean, I would certainly move that Alderwoman Navarro be chairman of the advisory committee. It's her resolution.
That's fine, I'm fine with that. I just want to make sure we're moving the process forward.
So can I make a suggestion?
Sure.
I'd like to nominate.
There was a motion, though.
I'd like to discuss your motion in that case. I think making Alderman Navarro the chair is a good idea. I think we could probably also nominate a co-chair, possibly not this instance, but we could talk about who the co-chair could be, and then we could come back and nominate the co-chair. Not me, I'm not suggesting me, but somebody, probably somebody who's not a member of the Board of Aldermen, I would think might make a good co-chair if we could find somebody willing to serve, but hopefully quickly. But in the interim, I think making Alderwoman Navarro the chair is chair of the advisory committee is appropriate. So I support Alderman Boyd's motion.
If I may? Well, one of the things I just want to be sure is that, and I know I think the spirit of what you're trying to do too is to make sure that individuals from all the different aspects are not only on the advisory committee, but are in positions. You might have a co-chair who is opposite position of yours, just to make sure that will bring it the legitimacy and the credibility that I think it would need for it to work. That way, and as long as I'm not that person, I can always speak my mind and not have to be equitable on every issue. But I think we need to make sure that is the case.
So are you suggesting that, if I'm hearing right, are we suggesting that, so Alderwoman Navarro would be the chair, or the advisory committee, and the co-chair should come from legislation or just from the public?
I'm more concerned that if we do the co-chair, and I think it's a good idea, I was going to suggest it myself, that it be just somebody on the opposite side of where she is on this issue.
Well, that would be you. So why don't,
It doesn't have to be me.
why
It
don't
can
we
be.
make you the co-chair?
That's
And-
just I just want to be.
I would be fine with that. And then I would say that
Okay.
if the two of you would
Okay.
start moving forward.
I'll serve
do you-
as vice
And
chair.
do you think that we should let each ward, well, you guys pick it, but you think we should ask different aldermen to pick somebody from their ward to be on this? Or do we think that
Not a bad approach.
how you feel? Well,
We don't have a limit of the amount of people on the committee, right?
No, there's not a specified number, there's no number in the resolution.
then I would say that we can ask each alderman to pick somebody, but I think we put a time limit on it. That
Yeah.
if you haven't picked somebody willing to serve on this and you guys could pick a date, let's make it, what is this? By September 1st,
That's far away.
then we move forward. That committee will move forward as it is. I'll have somebody turned in by the end of the day.
Okay.
So Terry, you would be the co-chair, you're the chair. If I'm correct in this, and it's kind of open and free, so anybody just chime in.
I guess that's, if I may, I guess that's one of those instances when you open up your mouth, you get drafted.
Yes.
Because it was not necessarily my intent to do that.
No, but I would think that, given your position with the caucus and everything, I think would be appropriate.
Okay.
And I think that certainly you have an opposing side,
Right.
and I think that you represent, or at least you get a lot of input from the members of the caucus. So I would think that would be a good way to go.
Alderman from
Yeah,
22nd.
Mr. Chairman, I think maybe considering, he's not here, but maybe considering Alderman Muhammad, since he is the sponsor of the bill to put it back on the ballot, maybe inquire of him if he might want to serve as a co-chair. But I agree with Alderman Ogilvy that there's probably some value in having somebody as a co-chair that's not a member of the Board of Aldermen as well.
Well, I don't know, and John's not here, I don't want to volunteer somebody
Right.
that's not, and
We don't have to do it today as far as the co-chair,
Well,
do we?
then we'd have to have another meeting, and, I mean, not that I'm opposed to, we can have a meeting, just a lot of, just everybody, just so you know,
I just
anybody
would
could
like
jump in.
that I think that, as a body, we have the most at stake here. And that having two co-chairs that are members of the Board of Aldermen are pretty critical, because if you seek to have volunteers from outside that have no stake in it, I think you may saddle a chairman with the full load. Just my thought.
No,
And then as they go in, I mean, from what I'm seeing here, they will be seeking outside input from various segments of our community, is that the intent. So I think if we have two people, co-chairs of this what are we calling it?
Advisory committee.
Advisory committee, I think then moving forward, they can involve and engage other volunteers, and they will be the ones that are accountable to us as a body. I think makes more sense. But that's just my thought.
If,
yeah, please.
I like the idea of Alderman Muhammad, too. If he is unable to or not willing, I'll do it. Okay.
Okay.
I mean, I know this is a committee, you don't want if-come kind of stuff.
Right, I'd
So-
like to, because the important still to me is if we get this back on the ballot, which is certainly what my hope would be, that we're far enough out ahead of that vote
Right.
so that the voters can make an intelligent decision, at least in my opinion. Last time, it was just thrown out there.
I'll work with you.
And
I'll work with you.
so
I'll be
right
happy.
now, we're going to go with Alderwoman Navarro, Alderman Kennedy,
I'll do it.
and if we have backup co-chairs, we'll do John Muhammad and Scott. Because I think then we got people on. It's an issue.
Getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
No, I'm just saying, if we have to have a back, say that, or you decide you can't, then we'll throw John in.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
If I may, I just want to say, I do have several meetings scheduled with various aldermen, and I plan to meet with Alderman Muhammad as well. And we're still very much having those conversations. So, I mean, I think designating a chair and having a co-chair makes sense today. But I guess I would just ask for a little bit more time. I wasn't prepared to present a full plan at this meeting yet, because as I said at last week, I just began initiating these conversations with the aldermen, and I would like to have the opportunity to speak with some of them and get their input before we get too far along in this process.
Well, I mean, so are you suggesting that you want to have another meeting? That we can set the meeting up today for, see, here's the thing, everybody's going to be on summer break. It's going to be really hard to get everybody
Right, and I'm
together.
using, I apologize, Chairman, I'm using summer break to meet with, to have these conversations.
But the issue is that we're still, the push, again, somewhat is that it gets on the April ballot, that we, I'd like to have as much information out there. If it does make it to a ballot, and that's always, if it does make it to a ballot, I would at least like to make sure information's out there on, not so much what the wards are going to look like, what the boundaries are going to be, but what exactly is going to be the duty of an alderman. What are you full-time, you're part-time? I'd like it to kind of be out there so people have a better understanding what they're voting on.
I have
I'm sorry. No, go ahead.
you wanted to speak before me.
Scott,
I have a
it's-
suggestion, that's all.
It's an open thing.
Go
Nobody
ahead.
needs to ask.
Suggest away.
I know there was a motion, but we may consider just considering you the interim chair until you've had these conversations and brought back a plan for the selection of the final, the final structure of it. That's an approach.
That sounds good to me as well.
Would it be appropriate to have two interim chairs?
It can be,
Okay.
yeah,
Are you interested in
I'll work with her, yes.
being the other? Okay.
I'll be it. If
Thank
it moves us along, I'll do it.
Thank you.
Can I make a comment now? So, can I make a comment, Mr. Chair? Okay.
I said it's open.
Alderman Navarro, so first I want to say thank you for taking this on. There's clearly disagreement on whether the charter should say what it says right now, but it does say what it says. And I think it's an appropriate and responsible thing for us to be doing to look at the impacts of what the charter says is going to happen and to gather input from the community and from within this building also on how to implement that in the best and fairest way. I think we need to look at these things as two independent things. Whether some question to change what the charter says gets on the ballot, again, I think is a separate issue from the role of this advisory committee. I think the role of the advisory committee is to make suggestions on how to best implement what the charter currently says. And they should not really consider, I think, rush that process, because there's a lot of work for you to do to reach out, to talk to all the aldermen, and for the aldermen to find somebody who, who wants to be on this committee. We want to make sure that we have people who are, committed to spending some time on this. And I don't think we can do that in a couple weeks. And then we have to, getting 30 or 40 people in a room is not always easy. So then there's going to have to be some lead time in order to schedule meetings and, to get input. So I just don't want to set up the expectation that any of us would be able to get this done by, 2 months. And I think we'll have a more valuable set of recommendations if the advisory committee is allowed the time it needs to do the work that this resolution says it should do. So I think that's that. But I think so far so good, and with co-chairs out there working on putting an advisory committee together, I look forward to seeing who's on that committee, and hopefully this committee, legislation committee, being able to give the thumbs up to that group, and then the actual work can start. Those are my comments.
And
Thanks.
my only comment on that is this resolution was passed out of the Board of Aldermen weeks ago. And it just now, the last couple of days ago is when you asked me to bring this back up.
Mr. Chairman, I actually didn't ask to put this on the agenda at this at this time. I'm grateful that we're having this conversation. I've been having conversations since this passed, and am at the stage where I'm reaching out to all of the aldermen. We were in the middle of the budget, and people were very busy. So I apologize that I haven't been able to move faster on it, but I am taking full advantage of our break to meet with as many people, because I do think this is very important, and I'm here, and that's why I'm here to let you all know that whenever you want to hear from me about the status of this, I will be here, and I'm happy to report back, and I'm very receptive to feedback and suggestions.
Can I make one more, I'm sorry, can I make one more comment that I forgot? I think we also just need to remind ourselves that this is an advisory committee
Right.
that will issue suggestions. And at the end of the day, it will be our job to look at those suggestions and convert them into a political process where we say these require changes to laws, or these require changes to policy that some department might implement in the future. So nothing, I hope we get lots of good suggestions, but they will only be suggestions, and none of them will be determinative, and we can pick and choose from those suggestions via the regular legislative process. So we just need to keep in mind that no matter what this committee says, we can't actually go to the community and then say, this is how it'll be, because it's still up to us and the rest of City Hall to implement or not implement any of the suggestions. And so this difficult process to establish a committee and have them do work and create suggestions, that process is still not what sort of takes us to the finish line. We then turn it back over to us at the 50-yard line, and we'll see what we do with it. So just want to point that out again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know you weren't here back when this was put on the ballot about reducing it to 14
I was.
seats.
I was.
You were here?
Yeah,
I mean, when it was first done back in 2012. You were here in 2012? You know, I've been here for a minute. It's hard for me to remember who all was here and who wasn't. Then perhaps you remember when my argument then was that this kind of thing needed to be done before we talked about reducing it to 14 wards. My point was that there should have been, in my opinion, a very broad and inclusive community process that tried to garner as much thoughts and ideas out of the community before making or putting anything on the ballot for people to consider. To me, that was the better approach, particularly not just the Board of Aldermen, but the entire city government from top to bottom. And hopefully, this board could have designed something that was more integrated and more coordinated than what I thought was just a piecemeal process of reducing the Board of Aldermen in a knee-jerk reaction that was presented to the people as a way to save money, which was not really true. And so consequently, we are, to an extent, those of us who did not support the 14 wards, we have our back up against the wall now, and we're now talking about doing the very thing that I'd argue we should have done before we reduced it to 14. And so that's why I would support this kind of thing and would very much want to be involved. But recognize that for some of us, we're feeling our backs up against the wall at this point when this should have been done at the very beginning. I argued for it. I spoke on the floor about it. I spoke on it in the committee about it. But it went in one ear and out the other because the agenda was to reduce this board regardless of any of the concerns that we raised at that time and what we thought was the sincere and very negative impact that would have upon half of this city in terms of its geographical area of North St. Louis. So then it's good that we're doing this, but this is what we argued in an even greater sense should have happened before we reduced it. So then I would hope that whatever comes out of this advisory committee, we know it's actually advisory, that we really take it into consideration. Because we may come back with a lot of things that are surprising once we have that kind of dialogue with the community. So, and then in an effort to move this along, I would agree to go ahead and be the co-chair. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I will ask the chair and co-chair to try to get together, maybe
Absolutely.
after this meeting, and then I guess just let us know what's going on, or if you want to meet again, we can, or if you want, we can just email the members of the committee. So
Right.
And again, I just want to make sure we're moving forward, that we're
No
not.
problem. We can get to that.
Okay, well, and I didn't mean purposely to leave you out, it's just we were moving along. Do you have any questions, Alderwoman?
Most everything was stated before. I said my main concern is that both sides be represented. I don't think they were the first time in 2012 when it was voted on. And so those concerns were addressed. And the fact that this is strictly advisory and changing about when the aldermen, we're going to have aldermen that were there for 4 years, and then what are we going to do with those people? You know, when we go just to 14, you know, if they got, time still on their 4-year, and how are we going to, you know, mesh it all together? And that's all, you know. So I think most everything was covered. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Then I just want to thank everybody on but this has been one of the best, I mean, I shouldn't say that, but I believe one of the best committees as far as participation. We've had near 100% participation at all our meetings. And I do thank everybody for that. And so we'll just stand adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.